I mean, if you want to end technology and end industry completely, maybe you could do that. I don't know, but I know energy independence is achievable if we have a comprehensive plan and we pursue it relentlessly. And at the same time, we could use it to put our people back to work, to rebuild our infrastructure, to rebuild our highways, bridges, dams, and so forth. And to rebuild our manufacturing plants, all those closed plants. We spent 2 weeks in Michigan earlier in the campaign. There's a factory on every street corner, and they're all closed. That is, they're all closed here. They're all open in China and the other places where they've been sent. Whether you believe in free trade or not, it's pretty obvious that people who made $20 an hour building cars in Michigan and now make $6 an hour carrying bags in the hotel, I mean, that has an impact on those people's families. And it reflects directly on the results of this bailout and what caused it, because there's nothing behind this economy, which takes me into the next issue, and that is the economy. This gentleman here that spoke before me said it better than I can say it. He's been personally involved in it. I have to a certain extent. I've been a bankruptcy lawyer for 30 years, and I've done tens of thousands of them for people. And I've sat in my office for many hours and counseled with people who are having problems with debts and so forth. Now, the last 6 months, I've been doing this. So as I was telling somebody earlier, in a couple more weeks, I might need a bailout myself. My office could certainly use an extra couple of $1 billion that seems to be laying around everywhere. But the point is, back to the point that the professor made, that one thing leads to another, and that is that if you look back at the time the Federal Reserve Act was first passed in 1913, and the time that we entered World War I, actually around 1918, I guess, the inflation that came to our country from the war and overspending during the war led immediately into an inflationary period with low interest rates and so forth, and now we have the Federal Reserve. And the example that Dr. Paul gives for why we should not intervene in the economy, in 1920 and 21, we had what was termed a depression because interest rates increased to try to get that inflation under control, and it provoked a slowdown in the economy. That's what the bankers refer to. They refer to it as a slowdown in the economy. What it really means, people are all out of work. So wages decline. A hot economy, that's when wages are going up, but a good one, cooling economy, that's when they're going down. Everybody's out of work, so everybody's happy, and the labor unions are quiet, and they're not demanding more money and things like that. But 1920 and 21, this period hit, and we did nothing. And in a brief period of time, it recovered. And we went into this period we call the roaring 20s. But interest rates, once again, came down, and everybody was buying, and they were in the stock market. I mean, you've seen all the stories. The roaring 20s, all of a sudden we get that under control with the 1929 depression. And you've seen films from all that where the guys were standing on the street corner selling apples for a nickel, and here's a fellow with a tin cup and some pencils, you know, that he's selling. And I've heard stories where men would walk down the streets and they would go up to people's homes and say, you know, I'll mow your yard for food or something like that. And if the homeowner agreed to do that and fed them, they'd put a chalk mark on the sidewalk to tell other men coming behind them that this is a good place, you know, they were friendly. But, you know, what are the chances that would happen today if we have an economic problem like that? I just don't see the social cohesion in society today that we had then. But the point is, you can trace this depression back certainly to the Federal Reserve Act, which allowed funding for the war, but to the war of its inflation, and then the 20s when the stock market was expanding. Similar thing has happened today in that in the 1990s, as the regulations that separated commercial banking and investment banking were stripped away. President Clinton signed the bill removing Glass-Steagall in 1999 that allowed commercial banks to essentially do All things financial is what my bank calls it, the bank Joe and I use in Tennessee. That's their motto, all things financial. They're an insurance company. They're stockbrokers. They sell mutual funds, anything you want. If you go in, I went in one time for something, I can't remember why I was there now. The banker starts asking me questions. Before I know it, I'm in his office and I'm talking about my retirement. You know, and I just really went in to make a deposit, I think. But that's how it works. I mean, that's how it worked. And so these companies, these commercial banks that were once in the business of taking in deposits and lending money at interest to corporations to produce things. And you create jobs through producing, through building stuff that people make that can be sold, not through paper. But it allowed them to go into the paper business. And as was pointed out earlier, homeowners were encouraged to buy homes. The president said, this is the ownership society, he said. Interest rates actually fell in 2003 to 1%, the interbank lending rate was. All these people were buying homes. I mean, in my office, 10 years ago, you never saw a client who had more than one mortgage. Now, it's extremely rare to find one who has less than 3 or 4. My point in all this is that there's nothing to fuel the economy except these bubbles. First it was the dot-com bubble. Then that was popped in March of 2000. You probably remember because your IRA probably dropped 50%. Mine did. But about the time it starts to come back, we have the 9/11 attacks, and the economy is wounded again. So everyone is encouraged to go into real estate. Everybody you know is selling real estate, and everybody you know is buying real estate and refinancing real estate. I mean, you know, everybody you talk to is negotiating a refinance of their home, taking out equity and so forth. So that gave the impression over 8 or 10 years that there was something to this economy. It was really hot. People were working. Everybody had money. Everybody was spending and borrowing. And the banks took all this real estate and packaged it into packages and used those to sell derivative paper. And they used that to borrow more money, which they used to buy more paper. And basically turned their companies into something akin to gambling casinos. And it got so big and so out of hand. And there's another side to it. The AIG, you've heard of that, this $85 billion bailout. Well, that was an insurance company that was set up to insure all these transactions. So people would buy insurance. They were nervous about the value of this paper, so they would buy insurance from this company and many others. That's just one. AIG owned 185 companies. But these insurance policies were also packaged and sold as derivative paper with the same thing, collateral for loans and so forth. And all of a sudden, all this was based on one premise, and that is that homeownership homes would remain high in value, they would increase, or they would remain the same. And they didn't. And when they started coming down, all this started collapsing. Lies were told about the real value to try to move this paper and to try to keep people in their homes and keep the values up. But sooner or later, it couldn't be disguised any longer, and it started to collapse. Well, the point is now, what we have is what we have. And while I agree that something had to be done, that something could have been nothing. And if it were nothing, these companies would all just go into bankruptcy. Now, bankruptcy is something near to my heart, obviously, because that's how I make a living. But it's also something that I understand. I've seen its power to resolve problems.